The slave market on Omega-7 station smelled like a mix of cheap cleaning chemicals and something darker, fear, maybe, or just plain misery. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the crowded marketplace trying not to look at the cages lining the walls. He'd been hauling freight across the outer rim for almost 15 years now, seen plenty of ugly things humans probably weren't meant to see, but he always tried to mind his own business. Keep your head down, do your job, get paid, move on. That was the rule out here in deep space where Earth's laws didn't reach and the Galactic Council looked the other way at things that would have started wars back home. Jake was only here to refuel and grab some supplies. His ship, the Frontier Star, was running on fumes and his food reserves were down to protein bars and instant coffee. The station's main marketplace was the cheapest place to stock up, even if it meant walking past things that made his stomach turn. He kept his eyes forward, focusing on the supply shop at the far end of the corridor. That's when he heard the crying. It wasn't loud. Actually, it was barely more than a whimper, the kind of sound that cuts through crowd noise and grabs your attention whether you want it to or not. Jake stopped walking. His hand went to the rail of the viewing platform overlooking the main auction floor, and he looked down despite every instinct telling him not to. The auction platform sat in the center of a wide-open space, surrounded by buyers from a dozen different alien species. Vraxians with their 4 arms and calculating eyes. Keltis in their environmental suits, their faces hidden behind dark visors. Graxians with their oily skin and reputation for running the worst kind of establishments in the galaxy, the kind where slaves didn't last long and nobody asked questions about what happened to them. But Jake barely registered the buyers. His attention locked onto the small figure standing in the spotlight at the center of the platform. She was just a kid. Couldn't have been more than 12 years old, maybe younger, it was hard to tell with Felinar since they age differently than humans. She had soft gray fur that probably would have been beautiful if it wasn't so dirty and matted. Her ears, those distinctive oversized Felina ears, were plastered flat against her skull, trembling with every breath she took. Someone had dressed her in rags that barely counted as clothing. Her amber eyes, wide and terrified, kept darting around the crowd like a trapped animal looking for any escape route that might exist. There wasn't one. Jake knew that. She knew that. Everyone in that room knew that. The auctioneer, some species Jake didn't recognize with too many teeth and a voice that sounded like gravel in a blender, was talking fast and trade standard. His words came through the translation device in Jake's ear with that slight mechanical delay that always made everything sound worse than it was. Lot 47, ladies and gentlemen and honored guests. Prime Felina female, fresh acquisition from the outer colony raids. Look at those ears, enhanced hearing that can detect a whisper from 3 rooms away. Night vision better than military-grade sensors. Reflexes that'll put your best guards to shame. The auctioneer gestured at the girl like she was a piece of furniture he was trying to sell. Perfect for domestic service, security work, personal entertainment, whatever your needs might be. The crowd laughed at that last part. Actually laughed. The girl flinched at the sound, and fresh tears rolled down her furry cheeks. Jake's hands gripped the rail so hard his knuckles went white. He thought about his daughter Emily, dead 3 years now from the Corlite plague that had swept through the outer colonies. Emily had been 14 when she died. Just 2 years older than this kid looked. He remembered how scared Emily had been in those final days, how she cried when the pain got too bad, how helpless Jake had felt watching her slip away despite everything the doctors tried. This girl had that same look. That same fear. That same desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might actually help. Let's start the bidding at 5,000 credits, the auctioneer shouted. Do I hear 5,000? A Vraxian merchant raised one of his 4 hands. The number on the display board jumped to 5,000. 6,000, someone else called out. 7. Jake watched the numbers climb, his heart sinking with each new bid. The girl just stood there, sobbing quietly, her small body shaking. She'd probably been through this before, kidnapped from whatever colony ship or settlement she'd called home, processed like cargo, sold to whoever wanted to pay for her. The Felinars were popular in the slave trade. Their enhanced senses made them valuable. Their natural agility made them good workers. And they lived a long time, which meant a single slave could serve for decades if you didn't work them to death too quickly. The bidding hit 10,000 credits. Then 12,000. A Graxian flesh trader, Jake recognized the tattoos that marked him as part of the syndicate's entertainment division, made the last bid. Jake had heard stories about the Graxian operations. Slaves went in and rarely came out alive. The things they did there, the things they made slaves do for paying customers, it was the kind of evil that made Jake believe hell was real and some people deserved to go there. 12,000 credits, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear 13? 12,000 going once. Jake pulled out his datapad with shaking hands. He called up his account balance. Everything he'd saved over 15 years of hauling cargo across the most dangerous routes in known space stared back at him. 26,000 credits. It was supposed to pay for his sister Beth's medical treatment, some experimental therapy that might cure the nerve damage she'd gotten in a shuttle accident. It was supposed to buy Jake a quiet retirement somewhere green and peaceful, maybe a small farm on one of the inner colonies where he could forget about the darkness he'd seen out here in the black. 12,000 going twice. The girl's eyes met Jake's for just a second. She didn't say anything. She probably couldn't even see him clearly from down there in the bright lights. But in that moment, Jake saw his daughter. He saw every kid who'd ever been scared and alone with nobody to help them. He saw a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. His hand shot up. 15,000. The auction hall went quiet. Heads turned to look at him. The Graxian flesh trader's eyes fixed on Jake with the kind of cold fury that promised future trouble. The auctioneer recovered quickly. 15,000 from the human gentleman. Do I hear 16? 20,000. The Graxian snarled, his voice harsh even through the translator. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. He looked at his account balance again. Beth's treatment. His retirement. His entire future. Then he looked at the girl. 25,000, Jake said, his voice quieter now but steady. That's everything I have. Final offer. The auctioneer waited, looking at the Graxian. The flesh trader stared at Jake for a long moment, then shook his head and turned away. Nobody else in the room was stupid enough to bid higher. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold. To the human gentleman for 25,000 credits. Congratulations on your purchase, sir. Jake stood there on the viewing platform, his account balance dropping to zero as the transaction processed automatically. He'd just destroyed his life to save a complete stranger. His sister's treatment was gone. His retirement was gone. His future was gone. But the girl on the platform had stopped crying. She was looking up at him now, confused and scared but not hopeless anymore. Jake took a deep breath and headed down to collect her, wondering what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Retry S. The station master's office was a cramped, dimly lit room that smelled like old metal and stale air. Krell, the Voxian who ran Omega-7's administrative operations, sat behind a desk that looked like it had survived 3 wars and a couple of pirate raids. His scarred face, covered in the thick, leathery skin typical of his species, showed absolutely no emotion as he processed Jake's transaction. The screen between them glowed with legal documents written in 6 different languages, all of them saying the same thing. Jake Morrison now owned another living being. The thought made Jake sick to his stomach. You know freed slaves don't last long out here, Krell said in his gravelly voice, his 3-fingered hands moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The words came through Jake's translator with that flat, mechanical tone that stripped away any pretense of concern. They get recaptured within days, sometimes hours. The syndicate doesn't like losing property, and they've got long memories. Or the slaves get killed by someone who doesn't want the competition if they try to work legitimate jobs. Most of them just starve because nobody in this sector recognizes their freedom anyway. Galactic Council doesn't enforce emancipation laws outside core territories. I'll figure it out, Jake muttered, watching his account balance on his personal datapad drop from 26,000 credits to 0. Then the transaction fees hit, and suddenly he was negative 200 credits. He owed the station money now. Perfect. Krell made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a cough. Sure you will. Every idealistic fool who comes through here says the same thing. You humans are particularly bad about it, all this moral righteousness about slavery being wrong, but you're barely 50 years into joining galactic society. You think your Earth values matter out here? They don't. Nobody cares what your species used to do to each other or how you fixed it. Out here, slavery is just business. Jake didn't respond. What could he say? Krell was right about most of it. Humans had only made first contact with the wider galaxy 4 to 7 years ago. Before that, they'd thought they were alone in the universe. The discovery of faster-than-light travel and the massive galactic community that came with it had changed everything. Earth had rushed to catch up, to prove they deserved a seat at the table with civilizations thousands of years older. And part of that integration meant accepting that the galaxy didn't share all of humanity's values. Slavery was legal in 70% of Galactic Council space. It was called different things, indentured servitude, contract labor, property rights, but it all meant the same thing. People owned other people, and the council called it a cultural difference that had to be respected. Most humans had learned to look the other way. Jake had been one of them for 15 years. Until today. The office door slid open with a hiss of hydraulics, and two Kelter handlers walked in dragging the Felina girl between them. She was wearing neural suppression cuffs on her wrists and ankles, thick bands of black metal that sent periodic shocks through her nervous system to keep her compliant. Her whole body shook with each pulse. Her gray fur was matted with sweat and dirt. Those oversized ears were still pressed flat against her skull in pure terror. One of the handlers, a big Kelter with rust-colored armor plating, shoved her forward roughly. She stumbled and nearly fell. Jake stepped forward instinctively to catch her, but she flinched away from him so violently she hit the wall instead. "She's yours now," the handler said, tossing a datapad at Jake. He caught it on reflex. "Ownership papers are all in there. Genetic markers, medical history, training records, everything you need. She's been screened for diseases and her immunizations are up to date. She understands basic trade standard, follows simple commands, hasn't tried to escape more than twice." The handler paused, then added with something that might have been amusement, "Try not to damage her too quickly. Station policy, no refunds after transfer of ownership is complete." Then they were gone, the door sliding shut behind them with a finality that made Jake's chest tight. Krell leaned back in his chair, watching Jake with those cold, reptilian eyes. "Your ship is in docking bay 7. I'd recommend you leave before word spreads about what you paid. You've made yourself interesting, and interesting people don't last long on Omega 7. Jake nodded, carefully approaching the girl. She pressed herself harder against the wall, her amber eyes wide and tracking his every movement. "Come on," he said softly, trying to keep his voice gentle. "Let's get to my ship." She didn't move. Just stared at him like he was a predator about to strike. Jake sighed and pulled up the ownership transfer on the datapad. The documents made him want to throw up. Species, Felina. Age, estimated 11 cycles, approximately 12 Earth years. Name, Myra. Origin, Outer Rim Colony Ship New Dawn, destroyed in Raid 7 months ago. Survivors, 17, all processed into Syndicate inventory. Status, compliant after initial conditioning period. Conditioning. They tortured this kid until she stopped fighting back. The walk to docking bay 7 took 20 minutes, with Myra shuffling behind Jake in her neural cuffs, flinching every time someone walked past them in the corridor. Other traders and station workers gave them curious looks. Some nodded at Jake in what might have been approval, new slave owner, probably heading out to make some profit. Others looked at Myra with the kind of hungry interest that made Jake's hand drift toward the pistol on his hip. The Frontier Star wasn't much to look at. She was a modified cargo hauler, 30 years old, with patched hull plating and engines that rattled more than they should. But she was Jake's home, and right now she represented safety. He led Myra up the loading ramp into the cargo bay. The space was mostly empty. Jake had delivered his last shipment 3 days ago and hadn't picked up a new contract yet. Good thing, too, since he was now broke and probably unemployable once word got around about what he'd done. The loading ramp closed behind them with a heavy clang that echoed through the bay. They were alone now. Jake turned to face Myra, who had immediately backed into the far corner, making herself as small as possible. Her ears were still flat. Her tail, he hadn't even noticed she had one until now, was wrapped tight around her leg. "Okay," Jake said quietly, kneeling down to make himself less threatening. He was still a good 15 feet away from her. "I need you to listen to me, Myra. That's your name, right? Myra?" She didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. Jake pulled out his multi-tool, extending the electronic lockpick. "I'm going to take those cuffs off you. They're hurting you, and you don't need them anymore. I need you to hold still, okay? I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." Still no response. Jake stood slowly and took a step forward. Myra's breathing quickened, her whole body tensing. Another step. She pressed harder against the wall, like she was trying to phase through it and disappear. "It's okay," Jake said, taking another step. "I know you're scared. I know you don't trust me. That's okay. You don't have to trust me. But those cuffs are sending shocks through your body every 30 seconds, and I want to take them off." He was close enough now to reach her. Myra's eyes squeezed shut, her whole body bracing for whatever she thought was coming. Her lips moved silently, maybe a prayer in her own language, or maybe just counting down the seconds until the next shock hit. Jake knelt down again, moving slowly. He reached for her wrist. She flinched violently but didn't pull away. Couldn't pull away, probably. The neural suppression kept her too disoriented to run effectively. The lockpick interfaced with the first cuff's control panel. It took Jake 3 tries to bypass the security. His hands were shaking more than he'd thought, but finally the cuff clicked open and fell away. He moved to her other wrist, then her ankles. Each cuff hit the deck with a heavy metallic sound. Myra just stood there, frozen, her newly freed hands hovering in the air like she didn't know what to do with them. "You're free," Jake said, taking several steps back to give her space. "Do you understand me? Free. No more cuffs. No more shocks. No more masters." Myra's eyes opened slowly. She looked at her bare wrists, at the red marks where the cuffs had been. Her fingers trembled as she touched her neck. There was a collar there too, Jake realized, one he hadn't noticed before. She tried to pull it off but couldn't figure out the release mechanism. Jake approached again, slower this time. "Let me help with that." She flinched but held still as he examined the collar. It was a standard syndicate tracking device, the kind that could deliver punishment shocks or even kill the wearer if they tried to escape. Jake's stomach turned. He used the multi-tool to disable it, then carefully unlatched it from her neck. The collar fell to the deck with a heavy thud. Myra touched her bare neck, her fingers exploring the space where metal had pressed against her skin for months. She looked up at Jake, those amber eyes full of confusion and something that might have been the tiniest spark of hope. Then she collapsed. Just dropped to her knees right there on the cold deck and started sobbing, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Her hands covered her face. Her ears stayed flat. 8 months of hell came pouring out of her all at once. Jake wanted to comfort her, to put a hand on her shoulder or tell her everything would be okay. But he didn't. He just stood there, giving her space, letting her cry. What else could he do? Words wouldn't fix what had been done to her. Touch would probably just scare her more. So he waited. Minutes passed. Myra's sobs gradually quieted to hiccups, then to shaky breathing. She kept her face hidden behind her hands. Finally, in a voice so small Jake almost didn't hear it, she spoke in trade standard, What do you want from me?" Those 6 words broke something inside Jake. This kid, this 12-year-old child, had been so thoroughly broken that she couldn't even conceive of someone helping her without wanting something in return. Jake crouched down, still keeping his distance. "Nothing, Myra. I don't want anything from you. You're just a kid. You deserve to be safe, to be free, to have a life that's yours." "Free," she repeated, like the word was in a language she'd forgotten how to speak. "Yeah," Jake said. "Free. I know that's hard to believe right now. I know you're scared and confused and you probably think this is some kind of trick. But I promise you, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to use you. I'm not going to sell you. You're free, and we're going to figure out what comes next together." Myra slowly lowered her hands from her face. Her amber eyes studied Jake with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She was looking for the lie, the trick, the moment when he'd reveal what he really wanted. Jake pulled out his datapad and called up his account balance, -200 credits. He turned the screen so she could see it. "This is everything I have left. I spent my entire life savings buying you. I can't afford to feed both of us for more than a week. I've got maybe enough fuel to make one more jump before I'm stranded. My sister needed that money for medical treatment that might have saved her from spending the rest of her life in a wheelchair. My retirement is gone. My future is gone. I gave up everything to get you off that auction block." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because I need you to understand, I don't want anything from you. I can't afford to want anything from you. I did this because it was the right thing to do, because I have a daughter who died and she was just 2 years older than you, because I'm human and we're supposed to be better than this." Myra stared at the datapad, at the negative balance, at the evidence that this stranger had destroyed his life for her. Her ears slowly rose from their flat position, not all the way up, but no longer pressed tight against her skull. "Safe?" she whispered, like she was testing the word. "Safe," Jake confirmed. "I know you don't believe it yet. That's okay. You don't have to. But I'm going to show you. Every day, I'm going to prove it until you do believe it." Myra nodded slowly. It wasn't trust, not yet, maybe not for a long time. But it was something. A tiny crack in the wall of terror she'd built around herself. Jake stood up and gestured toward the door leading deeper into the ship. "Come on. Let me show you where you'll sleep. You can have the passenger cabin, it's got a door that locks from the inside. You'll be safe there." As they walked through the ship, Jake pulled up his messages. 3 new ones from his sister Beth. He opened the first one. "Jake, I saw the charge go through. 25,000 credits. What happened?" Are you okay? The second one, Jake, please respond. I'm worried. The third one, I looked up Omega 7. I know what they sell there. Jake, what did you do? Jake closed the messages without responding. He'd explain later. Right now, he had to figure out how to keep them both alive on negative 200 credits and a ship running on fumes. But watching Myra carefully examine the passenger cabin, testing the door lock, slowly beginning to believe she might actually be safe, Jake knew he'd made the right choice. Even if it had cost him everything. 3 days after leaving Omega 7, Jake knew they were in serious trouble. The Frontier Star's fuel gauge had been flashing red for the past 6 hours, and his credit account was still sitting at negative 200. He tried calling in favors from old contacts, but word traveled fast in the freight community. Everyone knew what he'd done, spent his life savings on a slave instead of acting like a sensible businessman. Nobody wanted to associate with that kind of crazy. Myra had spent most of those 3 days locked in the passenger cabin. She came out for meals, ate whatever Jake put in front of her without comment, then disappeared back into her room. She didn't talk much. Didn't ask questions. Just watched him with those amber eyes like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to finally reveal what he really wanted from her. Jake tried to give her space. The kid had been through hell. She needed time. But time was something they'd just run out of. Tertier Station appeared on the view screen, a sprawling commercial hub on the edge of the Kepler system. It wasn't fancy, but it had cheap fuel and a reputation for not asking too many questions. Jake had docked there dozens of times over the years. He knew the layout, knew which vendors gave decent prices, knew which security guards could be bribed to look the other way if your cargo manifest didn't quite match what you were carrying. He brought the Frontier Star in on minimal thrusters, conserving every last drop of fuel. The docking fees alone would put him another 100 credits in the hole, but he didn't have a choice. Either he refueled here or they'd be stranded in deep space when the engines finally gave out. Stay in your cabin, Jake told Myra as the docking clamps engaged with a metallic clunk. Lock the door. Don't come out until I get back. She nodded silently and retreated to her room. Jake heard the lock engage. At least she was learning to protect herself. The station was busy. Midday shift change meant the corridors were packed with workers, traders, and travelers from 100 different species. Jake kept his head down and headed for the fuel depot, trying to blend into the crowd. His hand rested on the pistol under his jacket. Just a precaution. Probably unnecessary. He'd made it about halfway to the depot when the station's general frequency crackled to life. Every comm device, every public speaker, every datapad within range suddenly broadcast the same message. Attention all station personnel and guests. The human known as Jake Morrison is currently aboard this station. He is wanted by the Vexery Syndicate for theft of property. Morrison is traveling with stolen merchandise, a Felina female, approximately 12 cycles old, gray fur, amber eyes. The Syndicate is offering a 15,000 credit reward for the return of their property, plus an additional 5,000 for Morrison himself. Bounty pays dead or alive for Morrison. The Felina must be returned undamaged. Jake's blood went cold. Around him, dozens of heads turned, scanning the crowd. He saw a Vraxian's 4 eyes lock onto him. Saw a group of Kelter miners start moving in his direction. Saw weapons being drawn. He ran. His comm device buzzed. Myra's voice, panicked, Jake. There are people outside the ship. They're trying to override the airlock. Stay in your cabin. Jake shouted, shoving through the crowd. Don't open your door no matter what you hear. He could hear boots pounding behind him. Heavy boots. Military-grade armor from the sound of it. The Syndicate hadn't just put out a bounty, they'd sent their own recovery team. Professional slavers who specialized in hunting down escaped property. Jake knew the station layout better than most. He ducked into a maintenance corridor, pulled himself up a service ladder, and emerged 2 levels closer to the docking bays. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. He wasn't a young man anymore, and it had been years since his military service days when he could run for miles without breaking a sweat. The Frontier Star's docking bay came into view. 5 figures stood outside his ship, Skreth mercenaries, all of them, wearing combat armor that probably cost more than Jake's entire ship. The Skreth were bad news. 8 feet tall, 4 arms, exoskeletons that could shrug off small arms fire. They were the Syndicate's favorite enforcers because they were efficient, brutal, and absolutely relentless. One of them was working on the ship's airlock with some kind of override device. The others stood guard, weapons ready. They hadn't spotted Jake yet. He was still 50 yards away, hidden behind a stack of cargo containers. His comm buzzed again. Myra, terrified, "Jake, they're almost through the door. I can hear them. What do I do?" Jake's mind raced. 5 Screth mercs. He had one pistol with maybe 20 rounds. His ship was trapped in the docking bay with no way to launch even if he could get aboard. The station security wouldn't help, they never interfered with syndicate business. Everyone else on the station had just heard about the 20,000 credit bounty on his head. This was unwinnable. But Jake thought about Myra, locked in that cabin, terrified that she was about to be dragged back into slavery. He thought about her crying on the deck of his ship, about the way she'd asked, "What do you want from me?" like kindness was something she'd forgotten existed. He thought about his daughter Emily, who died scared and alone despite everything Jake had tried to do to save her. He wasn't letting another kid down. Not today. Not ever. Jake checked his pistol, took a deep breath, and stepped out from behind the cargo containers. "Hey. Looking for me?" All 5 Screth turned. The leader, identified by the red markings on his armor, tilted his head in what might have been amusement. When he spoke, his voice came through in trade standard with that clicking, insectoid quality the Screth were known for. "Jake Morrison. The Syndicate thanks you for making this easy. Surrender the Felina and we'll make your death quick. Resist and we'll drag you back to Omega-7 where they'll make an example of you for weeks before you're allowed to die." "Here's my counteroffer," Jake said, raising his pistol. "You leave. Right now. And maybe I don't put a round through your primary nerve cluster." The Screth laughed, all 5 of them, that horrible clicking laugh that sounded like bones breaking. "You cannot win, human. We are armored. We are trained. You are one aging freight hauler with a weapon that cannot penetrate our protection. Surrender." Jake smiled grimly. "You know what you mercenary types always forget about humans? We don't surrender. We fought a war against the Thoraxians that everybody said we'd lose. We won. We've been the underdog since we joined the galactic community. We keep winning. Want to know why?" He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he shot out the lights. The docking bay plunged into darkness. Not complete darkness, emergency lighting kicked in after a few seconds, casting everything in a dim red glow, but enough to even the odds. The Screth had excellent vision, but they relied heavily on their helmet sensors. Sensors that were calibrated for normal lighting. Jake had been in this exact docking bay dozens of times. He knew every container, every support beam, every shadow. The Screth didn't. He moved fast, using the cargo containers as cover. The Screth spread out, trying to surround him, but in the close confines of the docking bay their size became a disadvantage. They were too big, too slow in the tight spaces. Jake had learned close-quarters combat during the war. Not the clean, honorable kind you saw in training vids. The dirty, brutal kind where you used every advantage and fought without rules. He slid under a low-hanging pipeline that a Screth couldn't fit through. Came up behind one of them. His pistol couldn't penetrate the armor, but armor had weak points, joints, sensor arrays, cooling vents. He fired 3 rounds into the back of the Screth's knee joint. The armor cracked. The merc went down, screaming. Jake was already moving, diving behind another container as return fire tore through the space where he'd been standing. Maintenance access. Jake shouted into his comm, hoping Myra could hear him over the sound of gunfire. "There's a maintenance hatch in the floor of your cabin. Red handle. Pull it and go down. I'll meet you there." 4 Screth left. They were being more careful now, moving as a unit, covering each other's backs. Professional. Disciplined. But also predictable. Jake triggered the bay's fire suppression system. Foam and chemical retardant exploded from overhead nozzles, filling the bay with a thick white cloud that further reduced visibility. The Screth's sensors went crazy trying to compensate. He used the confusion to sprint for his ship. The airlock was still sealed, they hadn't managed to override it yet. Jake's command override got him inside in 3 seconds. He sealed it behind him and rushed through the ship to Myra's cabin. The maintenance hatch was open. She'd made it down into the crawlspace beneath the deck. Good. Jake dropped down after her, pulling the hatch closed above him. They were in the ship's maintenance level now, a cramped network of tunnels barely 3 feet high, filled with pipes and conduits and cables. It ran beneath the entire ship and connected to the station's own maintenance system. Myra was there, pressed against the wall, her whole body shaking. When she saw Jake, her ears perked up slightly. "You came," she whispered, like she'd expected him to abandon her. "Of course I came," Jake said, already moving. "Follow me. Stay quiet. Stay low." They crawled through the maintenance tunnels, heading away from the ship. Behind them, Jake heard the Screth breaching his ship. Heard them tearing through the interior looking for Myra. But by then, Jake and Myra were already 3 sections over, moving through the station's underbelly where the hunters couldn't follow in their bulky armor. Jake's shoulder throbbed. He'd caught a piece of shrapnel during the fight, nothing serious but it hurt like hell. His ribs ached from where he'd slammed into a cargo container. He wasn't as young as he used to be, and his body was making sure he knew it. But Myra was safe. That was all that mattered. They emerged in a cargo storage area on the opposite side of the station. Jake sealed the maintenance hatch behind them and took a moment to catch his breath. Myra sat nearby, staring at him with those wide amber eyes. "You fought them," she said quietly. "There were 5 of them. They were bigger than you. Stronger. Better armed. You should have died." Jake managed a tired smile. "Yeah, probably. Humans are stupid like that. We don't know when to quit." "But why?" Myra's voice cracked. "You could have given me to them. You would have gotten money. You would have been safe. Instead you." She gestured at his bleeding shoulder, at his battered body. "Why would you do this?" Jake looked at her, this terrified kid who'd been taught she was property, who couldn't understand why someone would bleed for her. He thought about how to explain it in a way she'd understand. "Because you're worth it," he said simply. "Every person is worth fighting for. Worth bleeding for. That's what being human means. We remember when we were the ones being bought and sold, back on Earth centuries ago. We remember how it felt, how wrong it was. And we swore we'd never let it happen again, not to us, and not to anyone else if we could help it." Myra's ears were fully upright now, her tail uncurled. She studied Jake like she was seeing him for the first time. "I want to learn," she said suddenly. "To fight. Like you. So I'm never helpless again. So I can protect myself. Teach me." Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah. I can teach you that." Station alarms started blaring. The Screth had realized they'd escaped. They had maybe 5 minutes before the hunters found them again. Jake stood, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Come on. We need to steal a ship. Can't go back to the Frontier Star, they'll be waiting for us there." As they moved through the storage area, staying in the shadows, Jake realized something had shifted. Myra wasn't just following him anymore. She was moving alongside him, her Felina reflexes and senses starting to emerge now that she wasn't frozen by fear. She pointed out a patrol before Jake saw it. Warned him about a security camera he'd almost walked past. They were becoming a team. And somehow, despite being broke, hunted, and running for their lives, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. 2 weeks. That's how long Jake and Myra had been running. 2 weeks of sleeping in the stolen cargo shuttle they'd grabbed from Tertier Station. 2 weeks of jumping from system to system, never staying anywhere longer than a few hours. 2 weeks of living on protein bars and recycled water while the bounty on their heads climbed to 30,000 credits. Jake had lost weight. His hair was getting gray at the temples, or maybe it had always been gray and he just never noticed. His shoulder still ached where the shrapnel had hit him. They were down to their last 50 credits, scraped together from odd jobs and one lucky card game at a mining outpost where nobody looked too closely at faces. But Myra was different now. She talked more. Asked questions. Started learning to read trade standard by working through the shuttle's technical manuals. Every morning she practiced the basic combat moves Jake taught her. Blocks, strikes, how to use an opponent's size against them. Her natural Felina reflexes made her a quick learner. Within a week she could disarm Jake 3 times out of 10 during practice. By the second week it was 5 out of 10. She was healing. Slowly, but healing. The encrypted message came through on Jake's datapad while they were hiding in an asteroid field on the edge of the Kepler system. Just 5 words: "You're not alone." The network. Below it was a set of coordinates and a time. Nothing else. Jake stared at the message for a long time. It could be a trap. The Syndicate was smart enough to fake something like this. They'd lure Jake in with the promise of help, then grab both him and Myra. Simple. Effective. But the encryption was human-made. Jake had worked with enough military-grade security protocols during the war to recognize Earth coding when he saw it. Whoever sent this message knew their way around human systems. "What is it?" Myra asked, looking up from her writing practice. Her standard had improved dramatically. She could read most basic text now and speak in full sentences instead of broken fragments. "Maybe help," Jake said carefully. "Or maybe trouble. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." Myra stood and walked over, looking at the datapad. Her ears twitched as she processed the information. The coordinates are for a safe location. No military presence. No syndicate operations. I checked the shipping routes, it's quiet space. Jake raised an eyebrow. When did you learn to check shipping routes? You left your navigation logs open yesterday. I read them. She looked almost embarrassed. I want to learn everything. So I can help instead of just being rescued all the time. Something in Jake's chest tightened. This kid who'd been property 2 weeks ago was now teaching herself navigation and tactical analysis because she wanted to pull her weight. He remembered his daughter Emily doing the same thing, always trying to prove she was capable, always wanting to help with everything. All right, Jake said, making a decision that was probably stupid but felt right. We'll check it out. But careful, okay? We go in ready to run if this goes bad. The coordinates led them to a small moon orbiting a gas giant in the outer reaches of the Kepler system. No settlements, no stations, just rock and ice and thin atmosphere. Their sensors picked up one structure, a prefabricated shelter half buried in a crater, the kind of thing miners used for temporary operations. Jake brought the shuttle down a kilometer away and approached on foot with Myra. He'd given her one of the plasma pistols they'd stolen from Tertier Station. She wore it on her hip like she'd been born to it, her hand resting on the grip in a way that would have made Jake's old drill sergeant proud. The shelter's airlock opened before they reached it. A woman stepped out, tall, maybe 40 years old, with dark skin and scars that ran down the left side of her face from hairline to jaw. She wore practical cargo pants and a jacket that had seen better days. Her eyes were hard but not cold. Calculating. Like she was measuring Jake and Myra against some internal standard. Jake Morrison, she said. Not a question. And Myra. We've been looking for you. Jake's hand went to his pistol. Who's we? The woman raised her hand slowly, showing she was unarmed. My name is Amanda Rivers. I represent the Human Liberation Network. We're the people your government pretends doesn't exist. Come inside. We have food, medical supplies, and information you need to hear. Jake didn't move. How do I know you're not Syndicate? Amanda smiled grimly. If we were Syndicate, you'd already be dead or in chains. They don't do subtle invitations. Now come inside before Myers freezes out here. The atmosphere on this rock is barely breathable and I'm too old for this dramatic standoff nonsense. Something about her tone, weary and honest and completely done with everything, made Jake trust her. Or maybe he was just desperate enough to take the risk. Either way, he nodded to Myra and they followed Amanda inside. The shelter was bigger than it looked from outside. The main room held about a dozen people, all human, all carrying themselves like soldiers or smugglers or people who'd lived hard lives and survived. They looked up as Jake and Myra entered, studying them with interest but not hostility. Amanda gestured to a table laden with real food, not protein bars or ration packs, but actual cooked meals. Eat first. Talk after. You both look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks. She wasn't wrong. Jake and Myra sat down and ate while Amanda watched with an expression that might have been sympathy. The food was simple, rice, beans, some kind of meat Jake didn't recognize but tasted amazing, but after 2 weeks of survival rations it felt like a feast. When they finished, Amanda pulled up a holographic display showing a star map. Red dots covered about 70% of the visible systems. Each of these dots represents a known slave operation, she explained. Markets, processing centers, transport routes. There are approximately 43 million sentient beings in slavery across Galactic Council space. That's a conservative estimate. The real number is probably higher. Jake felt sick. 43 million. The Galactic Council calls it cultural diversity. They say humans need to respect that different species have different values. Amanda's voice dripped with disgust. Most of our people do respect it. They look the other way. They do their jobs and go home and pretend it's not their problem. But some of us. She gestured at the people in the room. Some of us remember Earth's history. We remember when humans owned other humans. We remember the wars we fought to end it. And we decided we're not letting that evil spread to the stars without a fight. One of the other people in the room, a stocky man with gray hair and a mechanical arm, spoke up. We're the Human Liberation Network. We've been operating for 5 years. Rescued about 800 slaves in that time. We're small, we're underfunded, and officially we don't exist. Earth's government won't acknowledge us because it would damage diplomatic relations with the Council. We're terrorists to some, another woman added. She was young, maybe 25, with burn scars on her hands. Freedom fighters to others. Mostly we're just broke and wanted and trying to do the right thing in a galaxy that's made it very, very illegal. Amanda turned back to Jake. You made a lot of noise at Omega 7. Spent your life savings buying a slave in front of 100 witnesses. Fought off a syndicate recovery team on Tertiary Station. Word spreading. There are humans across the sector asking questions now. Asking why we tolerate slavery. Asking why we're not doing something about it. She paused, letting that sink in. You became a symbol, Jake. You and Myra. The human who gave up everything to save one kid. It's the kind of story people remember. The kind that inspires others to act. Jake glanced at Myra, who was listening intently, her ears perked up and focused on every word. I didn't mean to start anything, he said quietly. I couldn't walk away. That's what makes it powerful, the man with the mechanical arm said. You weren't trying to be a hero. You just did what was right. That's more dangerous to the syndicate than any army. Amanda leaned forward. We want you to join us. Both of you. We can offer safe houses, resources, weapons, training. You'll never stop running, the syndicate won't give up on that bounty, but at least you won't be running alone. And maybe, together, we can actually make a difference. Jake looked around the room at these people who'd given up normal lives to fight a war nobody acknowledged existed. They looked tired. Scarred. But also determined. Like they'd found something worth dying for. What would you want us to do? He asked. What you're already doing, Amanda said simply. Rescue slaves. Disrupt operations. Be loud about it. Make it impossible for people to ignore what's happening. You've got skills from the war. Myra's got Felina abilities that make her perfect for infiltration. Together you could be one of our most effective teams. Myra spoke up for the first time. If we do this, we help others like me? Other slaves? As many as we can, Amanda confirmed. Myra looked at Jake, her amber eyes serious. I want to do this. You gave up your future for me. I want to make that mean something. I want to help others who are still trapped. Jake thought about his sister Beth. He'd sent her a message a week ago explaining everything. Her response had been short, I'm proud of you. Do what's right. I'll manage. She'd found alternative treatments for her nerve damage. Cheaper, less effective, but she'd survive. And she told Jake she was volunteering to help coordinate the network's safe house system. He thought about his retirement plans, his quiet life, all the things he'd given up. Then he looked at Myra, this kid who'd gone from broken slave to determined fighter in just 2 weeks. He thought about the 43 million people still in chains, waiting for someone to care enough to fight for them. What's the cost? Jake asked. I need to know what we're really signing up for. Amanda didn't sugarcoat it. You'll be fugitives forever. The bounty on your heads will keep climbing. You might get captured, tortured, killed. Earth won't help you, officially you'll be criminals. Your family will be watched. Your friends will distance themselves. You'll lose any chance at a normal life. She paused. But you'll save lives. Real people who would otherwise die in chains. You'll make the galaxy a little less dark. And maybe, if enough of us fight long enough, we'll actually change something. Jake looked at Myra again. She nodded, small but certain. He turned back to Amanda and extended his hand. All right. We're in. Amanda shook his hand firmly. Around the room, people nodded approval. The man with the mechanical arm raised a glass. Welcome to the revolution. It doesn't pay worth a damn, but the company's good. Everyone laughed, the kind of laughter people share when they've all made the same crazy decision to fight impossible odds for something they believe in. Myra smiled, a real smile, bright and genuine, the kind Jake had never seen from her before. She looked around at these humans who'd chosen to fight for people they'd never met, for values that cost them everything. Thank you, she said quietly. For not looking away. For caring when nobody else did. Amanda put a hand on her shoulder, gentle, asking permission first. Myra didn't flinch. We're humans, kid. Caring about people who can't fight for themselves? It's kind of our thing. We're stubborn like that. Jake looked at his empty account balance, at his wanted poster now displayed on the shelter's screen showing 30,000 credits for his capture, at the maps showing 43 million people who needed help. He thought about his daughter Emily, and hoped she'd be proud of what he was about to do. So, Jake said. Where do we start? Amanda's smile turned fierce. There's a slave transport leaving the Orion sector in 3 days. 60 prisoners. We're going to take it. Interested? Jake checked his pistol and looked at Myra, who was already standing, ready to fight. "Yeah," he said. "We're interested." The revolution had just gained 2 new soldiers. The galaxy wasn't ready for what came next. Retry S. 2 years. 730 days of running, fighting, and freeing people who'd lost hope. The Frontier Star, the ship Jake had thought lost forever, had been recovered by the network 6 months into their operations, repaired, and turned into something between a home and a legend. Whispers spread across the outer rim about the ghost ship that appeared at slave markets, freed prisoners from transport convoys, and vanished before authorities could respond. Some said it was crewed by phantoms. Others said it was humans gone rogue, fighting a war their government pretended wasn't happening. Both stories were kind of true. Jake was 43 now, looking closer to 50. 2 years of constant combat and stress had aged him. New scars covered old ones. His shoulder, the one that took shrapnel on Tertier Station, still ached when the weather changed, which was stupid because they were in space where weather didn't exist, but his body didn't care about logic. He'd lost friends during rescues that went wrong. Watched good people die fighting for strangers they'd never met. But he'd also seen 317 people walk free who'd been property the day before. 317 reasons to keep going. Myra was 14 now, though she seemed older. She'd grown taller, her grey fur sleeker, her movements precise and deadly. The terrified child from the Omega-7 auction was gone, replaced by someone who moved through shadows like she was made of them. Her Felina hearing could detect a guard's heartbeat through a wall. Her night vision turned darkness into an advantage. Combined with Jake's combat training and 2 years of real-world experience, she'd become the network's most effective infiltrator. She was also the sister Jake had never had and the daughter he'd lost, though neither of them said that out loud. They didn't need to. Some things you just knew. They'd developed a reputation. The human and the Felina who couldn't be stopped. The syndicate had raised the bounty to 50,000 credits, 25 for Jake, 25 for Myra. Dead or alive for Jake. Alive only for Myra because they wanted to make an example of her, remind other slaves what happened when you tried to be free. The network had grown too. From 12 people in a shelter to almost 200 operatives across a dozen systems. They had safe houses, supply lines, intelligence networks. Amanda Rivers coordinated everything from a mobile command center that never stayed in one place longer than a week. Other humans were joining, people who couldn't look away anymore, who decided their comfortable lives weren't worth the cost of their silence. Earth's government still officially denied the network existed, but everyone knew that was political nonsense. Some human colonies were quietly supporting the network with supplies and information. The galaxy was changing. Slowly, but changing. Then everything went wrong on Kepler Station. The rescue should have been routine. A slave transport carrying 42 prisoners, mostly Felinars and a few Thraxians, was scheduled to dock for processing. Jake and Myra had done this kind of operation dozens of times. Infiltrate during the chaos of docking procedures, override the transport security, free the prisoners, disappear before station security figured out what happened. They'd freed 38 prisoners and were heading back to the Frontier Star when the trap sprang. Syndicate enforcers, not the usual guards, but actual military-trained operators, blocked every exit. Someone had leaked the operation. Someone inside the network had sold them out. Jake shoved Myra toward an escape vent. "Go. Get them out of here. I'm not leaving you." Myra shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "That's an order." Jake fired 3 rounds, dropping 1 enforcer. More were coming. Too many. "Get those people to safety. I'll catch up." It was a lie. They both knew it. But Myra also knew the mission came first. 38 freed slaves needed her to get them to the Frontier Star and away from this station. She hesitated for 1 heartbeat, her amber eyes meeting Jake's. "I'll come back for you," she said. Then she was gone, disappearing into the vents with that impossible Felina grace, leading the freed slaves to safety. Jake held the corridor for another 3 minutes before a stun round took him down. He woke up in a syndicate holding cell with neural suppression cuffs on his wrists and a collar around his neck. The same kind of collar Myra had worn 2 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. The syndicate didn't waste time. They broadcast Jake's execution date across every system where they operated. 7 days from capture, public execution on Omega-7 station where this whole mess had started. The message was clear: this is what happens when you interfere with our business. This is what happens when you fight the system. Watch the human die and remember that resistance is futile. They made sure the whole sector knew. Made sure every freed slave saw it. Made sure the network understood that their legendary fighter was going to be killed in front of everyone as a warning. The network's council met in emergency session. Amanda argued for a negotiated extraction, offer the syndicate something they wanted in exchange for Jake's life. Other operatives suggested a small strike team for a quiet rescue. Some even suggested abandoning the rescue entirely because the risk was too high and Jake wouldn't want them to throw away lives trying to save him. Myra sat through all of it without speaking, her ears flat against her skull, her tail wrapped tight around her leg. Finally, when the council seemed ready to vote on Amanda's negotiation plan, Myra stood up. "No," she said quietly. Amanda looked at her with sympathy. "Myra, I know this is hard, but Jake would want us to be smart about this. A negotiation gives us the best chance of." I said no. Myra's voice was louder now, harder. "You want to negotiate with the people who bought and sold me? The people who've enslaved millions? You think they'll honor any deal they make?" "We have to try something," one of the other council members argued. "We can't just assault a syndicate stronghold. They'll be expecting that. It would be suicide." Myra's amber eyes swept across the room, meeting each person's gaze. 2 years ago, Jake Morrison spent every credit he had to buy my freedom. He destroyed his future for a stranger, a slave kid he'd never met and had no reason to care about. He fought off professional mercenaries with nothing but an old pistol and stubbornness. He gave up his sister's medical treatment, his retirement, any chance at a normal life, for me. Her voice cracked slightly but didn't break. "He taught me that people are worth fighting for. That sometimes you do the impossible because it's right, not because it's smart. He showed me what humanity means, that you don't abandon people just because saving them is hard." She leaned forward, her hands flat on the council table. "He gave up his future for me. I'm not letting them take his life. I'm going to Omega-7. I'm going to get him out. And anyone who wants to help is welcome to come along. Anyone who doesn't, stay out of my way." The room fell silent. Amanda studied Myra with an expression that might have been pride or might have been worry. Probably both. "You're talking about assaulting a fortified station with military-grade security," Amanda said carefully. "Even if we mobilize every operative we have, we'd be outnumbered 10 to 1. The casualties would be catastrophic." "Then we don't fight fair," Myra said. "We do what Jake taught me. We use every advantage. We hit them where they don't expect it. We make them think they're hunting us while we're actually hunting them." She pulled up a holographic display of Omega-7 Station. "I've been studying this place for 2 years, ever since Jake bought my freedom there. I know every corridor, every security checkpoint, every weakness in their system. I know how the syndicate thinks. I know how they operate because I was their property for 8 months." Her fingers moved across the display, highlighting key locations. "They're expecting a frontal assault or a negotiation. They're not expecting what I'm planning." "Which is?" asked the man with the mechanical arm. His name was Tommy, and he'd been with the network since the beginning. Myra smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who'd learned from the best and was about to prove it. "We're going to start a slave uprising. From the inside. And when the syndicate is busy dealing with 3,000 prisoners simultaneously trying to escape, we're going to walk Jake right out the front door." The council stared at her. Amanda's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious." "That's insane," someone else muttered. "It's human," Myra corrected. "Jake taught me that humans don't give up. They fight impossible odds and somehow win anyway. They're stubborn and crazy and they care about people they've never met. That's what makes them dangerous." She looked around the room again. "I learned from the best. And now I'm going to show the syndicate what happens when you try to execute someone that humans care about. I'm going to show them what an uprising looks like." Tommy laughed, a short, surprised bark of laughter. "Kid, you're talking about coordinating a mass prison break across an entire station while simultaneously infiltrating their most secure facility. The logistics alone are impossible." "Then we get creative," Myra said. "We've got contacts among freed slaves across the sector. People we've rescued over the past 2 years. People who owe Jake their lives and would do anything to help him. We use them. We coordinate. We turn every slave on that station into a weapon against the syndicate." Amanda was quiet for a long moment, studying the station layout. Then, slowly, she started to smile. "You're talking about turning their entire business model against them. 3,000 slaves all trying to escape at once would overwhelm their security completely. They'd have to pull guards from everywhere, including Jake's holding area." "Exactly," Myra said. And while they're dealing with that chaos, a small team infiltrates the detention level and extracts Jake. Simple. Nothing about this is simple, Tommy pointed out. But he was grinning now too. But I'll give you this, it's the kind of crazy that might actually work. And it would be one hell of a message to send. Around the table, other council members were nodding. The plan was insane. The risk was enormous. People would die. But the alternative was watching Jake Morrison, the human who'd started this whole movement, die on camera as a warning to everyone who dared fight for freedom. Amanda stood, extending her hand to Myra. All right. We're with you. Every operative, every resource, everything we've got. Let's go remind the Syndicate why humanity ended slavery on Earth. Let's show them we meant it when we said never again. Myra shook her hand, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. 300 freed slaves depended on the network's continued operation. Hundreds of operatives would be putting their lives on the line. The entire movement could collapse if this failed. But Jake had taught her that some things were worth any risk. Some people were worth fighting for no matter the cost. We've got 6 days, Myra said, her voice steady and certain. Let's get to work. The council dispersed, each to coordinate different aspects of the operation. Amanda stayed behind, studying Myra with an expression that was equal parts concern and admiration. He'd be proud of you, Amanda said quietly. Jake. He'd be proud of who you've become. Myra's ears drooped slightly. I'm only like this because of him. He gave me everything, freedom, purpose, hope. He showed me I was worth something when the entire galaxy told me I was property. I'm not letting him die for that. I'm not letting him sacrifice himself after he's already given up so much. Then let's go get him back, Amanda said. Myra nodded, pulling up communications to start coordinating with their contacts across the sector. As she worked, she thought about that day 2 years ago on the auction platform. Thought about Jake raising his hand to bid everything he had. Thought about him removing her collar with gentle hands while promising she was free. He'd saved her life. Now she was going to save his. And then she was going to show the galaxy what happened when you tried to execute someone that humans, and one very determined Felina, cared about. The Syndicate had made a mistake. They'd given the network 6 days to prepare. 6 days to coordinate. 6 days to turn every freed slave, every sympathizer, every person who believed in freedom into a weapon. 6 days to start a revolution. Myra smiled as she sent out the first encrypted message. The Syndicate thought they were executing one human. What we're actually doing was lighting a spark that would burn their entire operation to the ground. Jake had taught her well. Now it was time to graduate.